retired United States Air Force Colonel John Furr, here to share the story of his 6-year captivity in the infamous Hanoi Hilton, and just as important, the strength that he drew from the people of this town upon his return. John, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
And, of course, you know that being around town and here that there are many places that offer lots of congratulations and thanks to you in many ways for the work that you've done past and, of course, the work you're doing now. So there's a lot to your story, and I think that in this hour we want to get to as much of it as possible because I think, again, it's going to be very important. I want to thank those students that we have here from Mary Star Elementary, 8th grade class here for extra credit. They're listening to this, and they're going to learn a lot from you, John. Why don't we do first here, why don't we talk a little bit about you and San Pedro, because the fact is that you're not just some fly-by-night guy. You were born and raised here long ago. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your story?
Well, I was, as you mentioned, I was born in the past century, really, in 1937. I was born in San Pedro to native San Pedran parents. My dad was a fire captain at 16th and Grand, which is still the fire station, and my mom was a homemaker. And I have one brother, and I went all through schools in San Pedro. It was the war years, the Second World War, so I bounced around because of the shifting nature of the enrollments because of the Army at Fort MacArthur. I was at Leland for a while. I was at Point Fermin for a while. I went to Mary Star. And then finally in my middle school years, I went to Dana and then on to San Pedro High School.
Now, what was this town like, if you can describe for us? What was this town like during the war years? Now, I know we had a lot of the shipbuilding going on here to support the war effort. A lot of families were here actually in housing that was created strictly for the workers there. My own grandparents on my father's side down here working as welders on that ship. Yeah. What was San Pedro like at that time?
Well, I was young. I was young during the Second World War, but I can still remember what you might call a very provincial, a very tightly knit, woven, interactive community that despite the fact that we had a lot of people who came from other places to work in the shipyards and, of course, the nearby aircraft plants, too, it was still a unique place to grow up because of its physical location. We're 3 sides bounded by water, and there were no freeways in those days and things like that. Everything was surface street. So
one way in and one way out.
One way in, one way out. And we grew close together. We grew very, very close together. We supported one another just like a large family. It was an extension of the family. The community was very supportive.
Again, for those of you listening, San Pedro sits here on the side of Los Angeles Harbor, one of the largest international harbors in the world, actually, and in the country. And we still have tried to keep a very, as you said, provincial, a very small town-minded idea here, raising families, churches, locations, local communities, the whole thing. And you've been part of that. You were saying to me before that actually you moved away from your house on 14th Street, and you moved over to the area of Paseo Del Mar when you were young.
Right. I was raised just a stone's throw from Dana Junior High School, or Dana Middle School as they call it now, and we went out to what our family's friends used to call Pneumonia Heights because the fog rolled in every night during the gloom months of the year. And
it still does.
It still does. It still does. It rolls over. You can see it. You can clock it. And we had a nice house on the corner of 36th and Elmira that is the location of one of the interviews that was done for me in Porttown, the movie. And had a beautiful view of the channel between Catalina and the mainland. My house was only 2 blocks from the water. And I grew up there. And my newspaper route was out there, carried that for a couple of 3 years, and I was raised there until I graduated from high school and then went off to USC for 3 years, and then following that I went to the Air Force Academy for another 4.
And your time there in high school was at San Pedro High School?
Exactly, was.
And it was in San Pedro High School in what we might term as the 50s?
Right. It was. I went up in '52 and graduated in '55. The summer class of '55. That's when we had 2 classes per year. They graduated the winter class and the summer class, and I graduated in the summer of 1955.
Now, did any of that provincial attitude hold once you got to high school?
Oh yes, very much so. Very much so. The social climate these days throughout the Southern California community is considerably different than it was in those days, in those years, simply because we have more people, really. But within San Pedro High School at that time, we had probably 1,500 kids, and now you've got double that. So, the complexion, the atmosphere, the environment does change just because you have more people. But I think the community, high school community, because there are a lot of native San Pedro teachers there, tends to
and very much and still are, yeah.
It tends to communicate and to encourage that same sort of environment that they and that I grew up in. It was very centralized on the community and cooperative efforts to work.
Now, also during that time, were you part of, just because knowing later that you become a pilot, were you one of those fast car group guys? Were you?
No.
You weren't running around with the club jackets and doing car races up and down the street?
No, my brother was. He had a chopped and channeled Chevy, 51 Chevy. I didn't go that route. I didn't even own a car until I graduated from high school, and that was a Model A. And it would only go in reverse up the hill to my house because it had a cracked block. And it would lose power going up in low gear, so I used to have to go up.
You go up reverse?
I'd go up in reverse, yeah. Cost me $60. First car I ever owned.
Did you ever get stopped?
No, it made a lot of noise, but, that's another thing about San Pedro. The police, my dad, because he was a fireman, we had this working relationship, a cooperative relationship with the police department, the fire department, the community, and that sort of stuff. So you could kind of stretch something a little bit.
You were part of the in crowd.
Well, I was on the fringes of the really in crowd, but I was part of the structure, the infrastructure. Yeah.
So, John, you graduated from San Pedro High in '55 this summer, and as you said, they had 2 classes then.
Right.
And then, was it your drive to go to USC, or did you stumble into that?
I did. I always wanted to be an all-city football player in the LA Unified system. And my idols were always, at that time, the football players, because I was raised around USC. My father was a rabid USC fan, and so I wanted to emulate football players and eventually get a scholarship to SC. Well, you only weigh 135 pounds, you're only 5'9", and you're not about to crack that code. So I didn't. I played D football, and I played 1 year of a part of 1 year anyway of varsity football at Pedro High. But I found that I could excel at long distance running. And so
you found that through trying out for football at the time that, hey, I'm a long-distance runner.
That's exactly right, yeah. And I ran, back in those days, we had classes A, B, and C, A varsity, and then B and C, the younger, smaller kids. So I started out with the Bs for 2 years in the 3/4 mile, the 13:20. And then in my senior year, I was quite successful as a miler on the varsity team in the half-mile.
Were you able to carry that to USC in your time there? Is that
I was.
Scholarship or anything?
No scholarship. Unfortunately, that was a time when guys were running close to 4:20 in the mile, and in high school, which is not really fast now, but I ran 4:27. And SC, had the pick of the litter when it came to recruiting track and field athletes. And so they recruited a guy that ran 4:19 in high school and set the national record. So I didn't crack in there, so I was a walk-on. And I ran cross country. And I lettered each of the years I was there in cross country for the 3 years. And then I lettered 2 years in track. And then that's when I got my appointment to the Air Force Academy.
Now, your appointment to the Air Force Academy, again, was this something that had been in your mind since growing up? You wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. Was there a family connection to that?
No. In fact, we had no family members at all up to the time I went into the Air Force that had served in the military during wartime or even peacetime. My dad always used to say he was too old for the first one and too young too young for the first one and too old for the Second World War. And then being in the fire department, that was a critical skill. So, he wasn't going to be drafted. He had 2 kids. He was married, had 2 kids. So we had nobody, no past experience in the military. But I always built model airplanes and flew model airplanes in contests, and wanted dearly to be a pilot. And really, that's why I went to the Air Force Academy. I thought the only thing about the Air Force was flying airplanes. And so I tried for 3 years. The 3 years I was at USC to get an appointment, and finally I got smart enough. I knew how to take a test finally after 3 years, and I got an appointment in 1958.
Now, at the time, did you still have to have basically kind of a sign-off from the local politicians for that, congresswoman or senator?
Yeah, I competed competitively. I was a competitive candidate for an appointment to the Air Force Academy, and I got my appointment through Senator Thomas Kiko, who has since passed away. But he would nominate 10 people, and you'd have 1 primary principal, and then 2 alternates, and then with the other 7 below that. So I got a principal nomination, and then I had to pass the SAT, I had to pass the physical, plus I had to pass the entrance test to the academy itself. So once I got through over those hurdles, and I was then accepted in the academy in June of 1958.
And you found yourself fully prepared to move through those demands?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is not some walk in the park to enter into the Air Force Academy?
No. See, I was an athlete. I was used to the bump and grind of football. I was used to punishing myself in training for long-distance running. And probably the biggest thing is that most of the kids in my class, and there were about 454 of us, most of the kids were right out of high school. I was almost 21 years old when I went in, so I had 3 years of maturity on them. And none of the hassling that they gave you, none of the beast barracks type thing,
you were spared the hazing.
Hey, I was in. Yeah, I took enough of that at home too. My dad ran a pretty taut ship, and so because you run the fire departments, you run a taut ship for leadership. So he taught me all those things, and so it was like water off a duck's back as far as I was concerned. I had no problems.
So once you were inside the Air Force Academy and you're out in '62, any significant relations in your life? Are you a single guy roaming around?
I was single all the way. I had a girlfriend when I went off in 1958, but after 3 years, I just decided I wasn't going to get married after graduation, which was the big thing. Guys get married right after graduation. So I decided that wasn't for me. I was going to go off and fly airplanes and all that stuff. So that one relationship was just canceled out, and I wasn't a big party timer. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't that kind of a guy, but I was just interested in the world. I was interested in airplanes. I was interested in traveling. I was interested in serving the country, as best I could. And I wanted to go to combat. I really did. I wanted always. Because I was raised in that era of World War II, the Korean War, and I just wanted to get in the action.
So, in 1962, graduated, commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant, and you are out and about to realize, I think maybe in some places to your own regret, realize that very dream that you have. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Back in the Day with Colonel John Furr, United States Air Force retired, and we'll be back. They just won't stop growing, and they always need new clothes. So next time you're hunting for kid styles, check inside Rebecca's Closet, San Pedro's kidwear specialist. If you need something for a gift, something special for that next baby shower, or trendy clothes for your own tot, Rebecca's Closet is the place for you. Rebecca's has a wide selection of fashions for newborns, toddlers, and kids up to junior sizes. And with back to school just around the corner, check out Rebecca's school uniform selection. New styles every week, the latest and the trendiest around. Stop by Rebecca's Closet, 8th and Pacific Avenue, one of the shops at the 8th Street Lofts.
San Pedro's first and only radio outlet, PirateTownRadio.com. Live radio broadcasts every Thursday night. Or join us live at the 8th Street Lofts building, 8th and Pacific Pacific Avenue in downtown San Pedro. Check the website for show schedules and bookmark us now, right now, piratetownradio.com.
Welcome. Back in the day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jim Cordero. I'm your host, and I'm here with Colonel John Furr, United States Air Force retired. And we're talking about Colonel Furr, about his life in San Pedro, about his time in the Air Force Academy. And we're now in 1962, and you've been commissioned as a second lieutenant. And where did you believe most first that you were going to be, where you were going to be used? Your talents as a pilot, where were you going to be used in your mind?
Well, I always wanted to fly fighters. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And so when I went off to pilot training in 1962, it took a year to go through. And when I graduated in 63, I unfortunately did not get a fighter. So I didn't graduate high enough in the class to get a fighter. So I was put into bombers, B-47, which is a medium nuclear armed strategic bomber. And my first assignment then was following checkout for that airplane as a co-pilot. I went up to Plattsburgh, New York, one of the coldest places in the United States, where they get 100 inches of snow a year or something like that. But anyway, it was on the lake.
And then you're heading thousands of feet high in the air.
Yeah, and I'm going from Southern California with balmy 70-degree weather year-round.
Right, Paseo del Mar, no less.
Yeah, where to a place where it gets 20 below zero and the wind blows, and you get snow piled 10, 20 feet high. Really, really deep stuff. But anyway, I was on the lake, Lake Champlain, and so I had a nice shared a place with a lot of my academy classmates, and I had a good time flying as a co-pilot in B-47.
What was your routine like? On a daily basis, you were flying, some days not flying others.
Yeah.
I mean, some folks would say it would be kind of like a regular 9 to 5, although the hours aren't that way.
Yeah, that in those days, we used to pull alert for 7 days at a time, and which meant you lived under the ground in a complex which had everything you needed: a dining hall and place to sleep, place to read, where you could get some leisure time as well. And then you'd get some time off in between alert schedules, and then you go back on the regular flying training routine. And SAC is a very professional organization in which
SAC would be Strategic
Air Command and
ran your schedule.
Right, and a lot of precise flight planning, a lot of precise missions. We'd fly 7, 8, 9 hours at a time, all over the United States, really. Some high level, some low level, and
now this was John during the height, if you will, of the Cold War.
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly. Yeah, I was there in that arena 63, and into the middle of 1966. So yeah, you're right. It was the right in the middle of the Cold War. And
so things were stressed. It was very, very cautious on some people's part, and at times were you ever scrambled out on alert? No plan?
Oh yeah. They blow the klaxon, the big horn, and you'd be any time during the day or night. You'd pull your boots on, get into your suit, and go running out to the airplane. And it could be in the winter time when there's ice all over the runway and the ramp, and you'd make your way out there, jump in the truck.
Yeah, there's no grounding due to weather. You've got to get up.
Exactly.
Well, why don't you describe for our listeners then what it must be like? First of all, you're heading up to what elevation in your B-47?
B-47, we'd go up to 42,000 feet, and except we used to refer to them as flight levels, 420, and you'd fly a high altitude run on a particular target at that altitude, or we would drop down to a lower altitude and just zip along at very nearly treetop level. We didn't get down to the treetop level. We got down low, and you'd go bumping around and fly the terrain, and you'd hit simulated low altitude targets too. And
that's quite a variance in things. When you were up at the higher flight levels, like you said, 420, when you were up at those levels, what was it like inside your cabin? What was, I mean,
it was toasty warm.
Yeah?
It was very comfortable, yeah. You always pray that nothing went haywire where you had to eject from the darn thing, which for me came later.
Yeah, that comes later.
And it's like leaving your living room. You know, you had an in-flight lunch, and the menu, the flight kitchen had for us to choose from was excellent food. So, you know, it was like, in a sense, it was like being in your office. You went to work and did it, except you had to be very precise. You couldn't make any mistakes.
Now, a few years later, you're comfortable and you've got your routine and you're flying the B-47s and, like you said, it's kind of like the 9-to-5er.
Yeah.
But then you receive kind of some kind of vague orders, and those vague orders are to report to Southeast Asia.
Yeah. What happened was, when the B-47 was phased out, beginning to be phased out, they were closing the 47 out at Plattsburgh, New York, and so we were given follow-on assignments, and I was going to go then to B-52s, and it happened in the meantime, in the interim, just prior to that assignment, tentative assignment, that I volunteered for the Air Force project called the Manned Orbiting Lab, which was going to be a space facility that was going to stay in fixed position above the air.
And what year is this?
This is in 1966.
So in 1966, you're
January
volunteering for the Manned Orbiting Lab, basically a space lab.
Yeah, and so I was in the crowd, and when you did that, they canceled all other assignments so that you could be considered for selection. Well, I was too junior, really, realistically, to be selected, and I knew that, except the fact that I got in the box. And so when I was not selected, that let me loose. And the war was cranking up then over in Southeast Asia, in South and North Vietnam, and so I got an assignment to electronic reconnaissance, an EB-66, and all it said was Southeast Asia. Was not
now,
specific.
My mother talked about those same orders coming from my father, as he was a navigator, and no country mentioned, no one was supposed to talk about it. They just simply had to report and were flown to a location. Now, you said you were going to be assigned to an EB-66. This is, again, a reconnaissance plane.
Right.
We'll get a little bit more into that, but you know eventually you're shipped out and you're sent to what country?
Okay, I went to Thailand. It was a small base at the town of Tak Lee in southern Thailand, not too far from the capital of Bangkok. And that's where, after Shaw Air Force Base, I got checked out of the EB-66. I was sent to Southeast Asia, Tak Lee, Thailand, which was a base that was not acknowledged to exist, although practically everybody knew it did.
But you said that the Thai government did not want their participation known.
Exactly.
So it was kept secret.
Right. They did not want it advertised that the United States was flying combat missions off their territory. And so it was just not advertised. And so that's what happened. I got over there in June of 66 and started flying.
And you joined up with the 41st Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron?
That's right.
And basically working on there, you're working for electronic jamming and surveillance. And you would run these, you said these missions would run for a couple of hours, and you'd be bringing in, basically paving the way then for the fighters and the bombers.
Right. Primarily for the air-to-ground fighter bombers like the 105s or the F-4s, and nighttime we do it for the night fighters, the A-6s, and later on some versions of the F-105. But we would fly a racetrack pattern and then alternate it as a figure-8 pattern out of the harm's way, really. We're not supposed to, theoretically, we're not supposed to fly in the lethal area of the surface-to-air missiles or the anti-aircraft guns, radar-guided, which made them quite deadly. We fly at a flight level 320 or approximately 32,000 feet. And there'd be two of us.
And that was supposedly your safe area for you to do the jamming and the surveillance, and then of course the fighters would come in at lower levels to strike.
Exactly. We'd fog up the North Vietnamese radar scopes so they couldn't pick out the airplanes when they came in. They couldn't paint them.
You say fogged up, and you describe this as being what somebody might see if their television's on the fritz. They'd have their radar screens be looking, and all of a sudden everything would go fuzzy.
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
Exactly. All that static and noise and all that sort of stuff. And when you have that on the screen, then the airplanes can fly in and they're not detected.
Okay. Inside that AB-66, you talked about that there were yourself, pilot, navigator, and then you had four, what do you call it, EWOs, electronic warfare officers.
Exactly. They were nicknamed Ravens. And their job back there, those four guys, had duties assigned to them. Some would listen for signals and plot those signals depending upon the compass direction where they read them from on the charts and just confirm it.
Right. In just a few moments, we're going to be back with Colonel John Furr, U.S. Air Force retired, and we're going to talk about that fateful day in February of '67 where that nice, comfy cabin of yours became icy air. This is Jim Cordero with Back in the Day. Creative fashion, the latest styles, chic accessories. You can find it all at Merall Designer Boutique, one of the many treasures here at the shops at the 8th Street Lofts. At Merall's, you'll find every woman's dream, beautiful styles, and unique designs for any occasion. That special evening out, casual looks for comfort at work, or just to feel good around the house. Merall's has a wide variety of designer choices, including the finest from Flax Engelhart and Citron of Santa Monica. And Merall's accessories abound with belts, bangles, sunglasses, handbags, and lots of exotic jewelry from around the globe. Fashions in every size, something for every woman. It's all here at Merall's Designer Boutique, 8th Street and Pacific Avenue in downtown San Pedro.
Treat yourself to a beautiful experience at the new talk of the town in San Pedro, the Lord's Niece Salon.
Broadcasting live from Cafe Port Town in downtown San Pedro at 8th and Pacific, and this is your Pirate Town Radio Network. We're here with Colonel John Furr, United States Air Force, retired, and John is telling us about his time in the early mid-60s, assigned to the 41st Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron, an electronic jamming and surveillance unit in Vietnam. And you were flying missions in the north, I assume? Did you fly into Laos?
Right. Yeah, we had to fly over Laos. The navigation, electronic navigation facility was located on a hilltop in northern Laos, and we would plot our course to intersect this particular facility, and then turn to go into North Vietnam from there. So we had to go from Thailand across to Laos, and then to North Vietnam. Yeah, and we flew a safe corridor, theoretically a safe corridor between the Chinese border to the north and the surface air missile defenses in the south around the capital city of Hanoi. I was supposed to be safe in there.
Supposed to be safe. Now, you say it's supposed to be safe. How many times during this tour that you were on, how many times were you actually in your EB-66 threatened with SAM or surface air missiles in this time period?
I flew 54 missions, counting the one I got shot down on. And 53 of them were virtually uneventful to speak of. I did see some SAMs that were fired in our direction one time, but they exploded at an altitude far below our flight altitude. So there weren't even a threat, and we never saw gunfire. It was always reserved for lower flying airplanes, and we were way up there. So, you're flying around up there feeling very comfortable.
The men in the Ravens, as you call them, the EWOs, electronic warfare officers working the back, was this a regular group for you guys, or was this something that they would alternate?
Occasionally, you'd get a guy that was an officer that was on leave, or he'd be sick, what we call DNIF, duty not including flying, and they'd get a replacement to sit in on the crew. But generally speaking, I flew with the same navigator and the same four guys in the back end time after time, mission after mission. So you work as a team.
And so you guys know these guys quite well.
Exactly. I did, yeah.
Well, John, let's talk about that day, February 4th, 1967. Regular mission starting off, nothing special?
Nothing unusual, regular mission. The two of us, as we always did, flew together. I had a wingman, and we'd fly up there once we passed
another EB-66?
Another EB-66, and that was a different model because the only thing they did was barrage jam. In other words, they had a two-man crew. A three-man crew. They had a jammer, and they had a navigator and a pilot. And what happened would be for them to fly in the target area and just turn a switch on and just turn all their jamming gear on and just let it hang out. Just let it just jam everything, all sorts of frequencies in different directions. So they didn't do any passive work. We did active and passive, and they did only active. But anyway, we flew in a two-ship. We got up in northern Vietnam in the F-4s, the escort airplanes. Would come out of one of the bases there in Thailand, and they'd fly. There'd be four of them usually.
What time of day was this?
This one was probably about 1 in the afternoon. This was an afternoon mission, and it'd take you about roughly maybe an hour to get up there. And so I get up there about 2 o'clock, and then you stay in orbit for maybe 30 minutes or something like that, doing your jam, and then you turn around and come home.
You've been on 53 of these missions.
Yeah, this was the 54th one that I was on.
Do you recall what day of the week this was?
No, I don't.
I
really don't.
Having flown 53 of these missions, this being 54th in the afternoon, probably a nice day.
Oh yeah, it's beautiful. It's a gorgeous day.
Did you have plans for after work?
No, I never made plans. My only plan after getting back was to go to the officers' club, have a steak, a nice glass of beer, and then go to bed and get ready for the mission the next day.
That sounds like a good plan.
Now we used to take off at 5 o'clock in the morning, so it was pretty.
Tell us, please, when did you first notice something was wrong?
When I heard 2 explosions.
Well, that could be problems.
It was really a shocker because
there was no warning.
No, none whatsoever. No, here's the thing: we're flying. I'm headed east. All right, I had just turned into this safe area, and I'm heading east toward the Gulf of Vietnam and toward the water. And I'll turn short of that and come back out again. But I'm heading in that direction, and the navigator says, "Okay, you reached the point where we need to turn and go back again." And so when I did that, when I heard that, I started to turn, and the head Raven 4, the most senior guy back there, said, "No, hold it for just a little bit longer." And what that meant to me was that he'd heard something that was unusual.
And so you needed to stay in the area to check it out.
Stay in the area to check it out. You needed to plot the location. Well,
was he plotting the SAMs?
Oh, yeah, he was plotting the SAMs. And what happened was, after he said, "Okay, it's okay to turn now," and the navigator said, "All right, turn, but turn very steeply." So I rolled over in a real steep bank to turn back out around and come out again because we did not want to violate Chinese airspace. That was a no-no. So anyway, I turned.
So many considerations at this
time.
Oh
yeah. A lot of political considerations. So I turned to go back again, and just about the time I rolled into the turn, there was a huge explosion that rocked the airplane. But I regained control of the airplane. There was no problem. And then just microseconds later, a second missile actually impacted the airplane and hit back in the rear where the 4 Ravens were seated, and it split the airplane in half and killed 3 of them.
So they were 3 of those individuals that you knew. These were men that you'd flown with
exactly.
times.
Yeah.
They were
killed right away. Yeah. They were
killed right away. EB-66 is now in 2 pieces.
We're in 2 pieces. One of the Ravens got out. The youngest kid got out because he was seated furthest away from the explosion, so he was shielded.
Now, when they were working, were they actually parachuted while they worked?
Yeah. They sat in an ejection seat which went downward. 4 of them went downward. Now, the navigator and I had ejection seats that went upward. And so that's interesting and significant because when the escort airplane saw the airplane break in half and catch on fire, they did not see the guy that ejected downward because he went down out of sight. They didn't see that. They were only looking for the 2 guys that went up. So they said only 2 shoots were sighted. That's all they reported were 2 shoots. So we got that.
For our listeners, I want to give just a little bit of information here. What was it like having that ejection seat? Basically an explosion beneath you.
Yeah. It's a rocket seat, but I'll tell you, it happens so fast. It happens. You pull up 2 handles and squeeze the trigger, and bam, you're out of there. And the jolt can can be pretty severe if you're not set, but I don't even remember a severe jolt. All I remember is just going out of this thing and having the wind hit me in the face and separate from the seat and tumbling through the air, headed down.
So what speed were you traveling when you guys were hit? Because that's actually
probably close to 500 miles an hour.
500 miles an hour. Now you were actually free floating.
Exactly.
Having been going that fight, so that's still affecting you and the ejection seat.
It blew out my eyes. I in my haste to get out of the airplane, I did not pull the visor down, so the wind, the slipstream blasted my eyeballs so badly that they ruptured the vessels in there, and I couldn't see for a few minutes. And they were bloodshot, very, very red. And so I was tumbling through the air. And you know, there's an automatic deployment mechanism in that parachute that when you reach 14,000 feet, if you're incapacitated, for instance, and you reach 14,000 feet, it'll automatically deploy for you. There's a barometer that'll deploy it. And I started thinking about this as I was tumbling down through there, and I said, what if that thing doesn't work?
Yeah.
What if it doesn't work? So I said, oh, the devil of that. So I pulled it.
Pulled it yourself?
I pulled it about 28,000 feet, you know, and it's colder than daylight. So I'll tell you, it is really cold.
And when you landed, you told me that you suffered just some minor injuries, we might call them.
I had some shrapnel, some small shrapnel that hit where, I told you the other day, I got hit
by Forrest Gump action.
Right where Forrest Gump got hit in the buttocks. And I had some scrapes and things like that from going out the airplane. Yeah.
Now, you said that you had seen on your way down, when you were trying to maneuver your chute, you had seen that there were some militia in the area, and you knew that they were going to be looking for you. You tried to evade for a couple of hours?
45 minutes.
45 minutes.
45 minutes, oh yeah.
45 minutes on the run, after having been shot down and in a foreign country. Were you armed, of course, as pilot? What were you carrying?
Had a 38. It was Smith & Wesson, and I ran as far as I could, and then I got tangled up in all of this undergrowth, you know, the jungle vines and trees and shrubs and all that stuff, with the prickly spines all over these vines, and I couldn't go any further, so I looked for a place to hide, and I hid behind this small banana palm. It was only about 9 or 10 inches in diameter, and you see my body's much wider than that. But these guys were so excited to chase me and catch me that they ran right by me, didn't even see me. And
what must your heart have done when you saw them run right past you?
I said, God, I was praying like the daylight. I was praying.
John, was there any thought that you might have to actually defend yourself with that 38?
It passed through my mind probably for a microsecond or two. When I saw that I was surrounded, they all had weapons. I figured this is a losing proposition if I try to pull a John Wayne on them. And,
right. No mas.
Say, no. I just held my hands up. And,
so on that day, John, on February 4th, 1967, on that nice afternoon, probably around maybe 2 o'clock by now or so.
It was 3:30 when I finally got captured.
You were captured at 3:30 by this militia group, and you said that you found yourself within hours bound
for Hanoi,
and being shipped by truck to Hanoi, to the infamous prison, the Hanoi Hilton, which had been housing American prisoners for some time there in horrid circumstances. When you first arrived there, we have just a few moments here to talk about this. When you first arrived there, what was your arrival like?
Well, it was dark, and I was blindfolded, and I was led into a small room where, up to this point, you know, I had been stripped of all my clothes except my underwear and an undershirt and a pair of socks. And so I was ushered into this room where I stood there in front of this interrogator, and that's when the interrogation started, when I refused to answer questions, and I told them I couldn't.
As per your survival training.
Exactly, the same thing. Name, rank, service number, date of birth, that's it. And of course they don't stop there.
No.
They want further information, mostly military at that point, because it's important for them to find out what the targets are, what the complement of my organization is, that sort of stuff. Yes.
This is retired Colonel John Burr, United States Air Force. We'll be back here at Cafe Fort Town, broadcasting Pirate Town Radio. This is Back in the Day.
Planning a special event?
www.showschedule.com. Here with Colonel John Furr, United States Air Force retired, and we have just heard John's story of being shot down, his EV-66 reconnaissance plane being shot down on February 4th, 1967, and his 45 minutes of evasion, his capture, is being taken immediately to the Hanoi Hilton, the infamous prisoner of war location, and that they didn't stop with name, rank, and serial number. John, you talked about this before. Actually, there was a fantastic documentary that was put out here by individuals here at Camping Port Town. It's called Port Town itself, and you were interviewed about your time in captivity.
Right.
And if there was one thing that you wanted to say about that time, maybe one thing that got you through, or one thing that you recall as being the most important, what might that be?
Without question, faith in God, intense prayer all the time. I was raised that way, and when things looked hopeless, things looked very discouraging, occasionally really depressing, I just resorted to that faith and a lot of prayer. That's what got me through, no question about it.
And I think I've heard from my studies that really is that, and remembering home is what got a lot of these individuals in. John McCain, of course, talks about that. Senator John McCain talks about his time there and how important that was to him. How much communication did you have with the other prisoners? We've heard and understood that there were some complex systems of communication that were put in place, since nobody was ever really allowed to see one another until there were those release pictures and release gatherings.
Right. Basically, the method of communication was to tap with a code on the wall. It's a code that was devised during the Korean War, and it was passed down through the years, and it was a matrix of alphabet letters that you made words and phrases out of. You tapped on the wall, and you communicated both between cells and also on distances. You could use all sorts of methods. Sweeping with an old bamboo broom, for instance, you could run the code that way. You could do it with coughing. You could do it with sneezing. But basically what it boiled down to was using that code to tap on the wall to communicate. And it was virtually unbreakable. You couldn't tell when somebody was tapping because there was no way to monitor it. So once you got in your cell, you could communicate very well.
Was this rudimentary information, or were you able to?
Oh, no.
Were you able to communicate complex directions, commands?
Right. Once you establish communication, it's just like life itself outside of a prison environment. Once you establish communication with a group of people, then you can establish an organization. And the organization is designed to work, its members are designed to work together so that you could resist exploitation by the enemy for political purposes, propaganda purposes. So communication, establish the organization, and then the senior ranking officer, you'll know who that is by the exchange of information, and then they'll pass it on down. The rules, the regulations, the way to behave, all based on the code of conduct.
There was much of that propaganda. Were you in any of those famous photos or television?
No, I fought that. To the nth degree. I did not ever want to bring. I said this in Port Town, the movie Port Town. I did not ever want to bring shame upon my family name and the community from which I came, which was San Pedro. I didn't want them to read about me in the newspaper appearing in front of some left-wing wacko who was making a political propaganda visit to North Vietnam. Like Jane Fonda.
You're talking about Jane Fonda and her visit. You, at this point, then, you decided that resistance and the consequences that it brought you was a more favorable direction than compliance and the shame that you thought you could bring upon your family.
Exactly.
6 years, correct?
Right.
6 years.
6 years and a month. 1 month, right to the day.
And in March of 1973, you were released.
Right.
How many other officers were released with you?
We had about 105 people in my group. It's the second large group. One first large group of about the same number went out on the 12th of February, and then there was a smaller group on the 20th of February, then my large group on the 4th of March. And we went to March Air Force Road to Clark Air Base for 4 days.
Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines.
And then flew across the pond and came over to March Air Force Base, where I spent a couple of weeks down there recovering, being checked out.
What was your health like at this point when you went to March and you had to recuperate?
Very good. I was blessed. I think a lot of it had to do with my physical conditioning before I got shot down. It had a lot to do with genetics. My father was an athlete. My brother Pete's an athlete. I was an athlete. I didn't smoke. I didn't drink to excess. I kept good physical condition throughout my life up to that point, and also in the prison camp through a rigorous exercise program. And I was blessed. No teeth problems and no other physical problems at all. And I don't think I had any mental problems.
You don't think?
That's right.
John, tell us about coming home. Tell us about coming down back to San Pedro.
It was great. When I got home, the town, of course, all through the war, you got to understand this too, a really nice man by the name of Gail Palmer was writing a regular report, a regular story on me and what was going on in the war for the San Pedro News Pilot. And Gail Palmer and the News Pilot had been promoting this hometown boy, as a POW, and they would give timelines. He's been there a year. He's been there 2 years. He's been there 3 years. John first starts his 4th year. John first begins, et cetera, and so forth. And so the community had a really excellent narrative that he was providing for them. They would interview my brother. They'd interview my mom and my dad. They'd interview friends. And so there was this whole atmosphere that was generated around me, and frankly, over which I had no control, and was just very appreciative.
They were holding to the maxim, gone but not forgotten.
That's right. They sure were. And they went back and they reviewed my past as a runner, as a student, as this, that, or the other thing. And so the stage was set for a really great homecoming. And the Chamber of Commerce took the bull by the horns, and they organized the city San Pedro-wide homecoming for the 7th of April in 1973. And it took place at San Pedro High School, right there on the old football field, which is still called Dodson Field.
Dodson Field.
On 7th, yep. Bleachers were on 17th Street, and a helicopter flew me in from the fire department. I was escorted by all the cheerleaders from San Pedro High School to a speaker stand. The mayor was there.
Mayor Sam Yorty?
Mayor Sam Yorty was there. Assemblyman Vincent Thomas was there. And Congressman Glenn Anderson couldn't be there, but he sent a proclamation. It was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And then after it was all over, the MC invited everybody out of the stands who had one of those bracelets with my name on it, to come down and in exchange, if they wanted to give me the bracelet, I would give them a signed certificate with my appreciation. The chamber had them all printed up. And that's how I met my wife. Nancy's girlfriend, Donna, was wearing my bracelet. And so she said to Nancy, why don't we go down to the rally, and we'll go to the dinner that night at Mary Starkey's auditorium. And so Nancy came along, and she went through the line, and she said, welcome home and all that. And to this day, I don't even remember it. I don't remember 1 minute of her time talking to her.
Oh, you're in trouble.
I know.
She's right over there, your lovely wife. She remembers every moment of it.
But it was the greatest day of my life because it started a wonderful, wonderful marriage, and I've been immensely happy ever since.
Your time alone with your family when you came back, that must have been extremely, extremely taxing on you.
It was a mixed bag in a sense because I had all of these people, all of these organizations that were calling my late sister-in-law, Maggie, asking if I would be willing to speak to them. And I never turned one down. I never turned one of them down, and I didn't turn radio interviews like this down. Ray Green, I don't know whether you remember him, up on, I think it was ABC, had a talk show, and I went on the talk shows. We talked about different things. I went to church groups. I went to my former school at White Point. I went to Point Furman. I taught at other venues where I wanted to share with them. I wanted to thank them. I wanted to show them how much I appreciated their faith and their support of us and that sort of thing. So that did. My convalescent leave of 90 days was made up, except for about a 10-day trip to Hong Kong, which I always wanted to take. Except for that, it was virtually all taken up with speaking engagements and appearances, which I really enjoyed and which the people who asked me richly deserved. They really did. I wanted to repay them.
Well, I think now, even decades later, your story resonates with us. We have individuals even today now that are missing in action in any of our conflicts in the Middle East and elsewhere. Still many people missing from previous conflicts. John, I want to thank you very much. It's been such a great time. I appreciate your service, your dedication to your country, because we know even still you serve today.
And you too, Jim, and for your father's contribution as well as sacrifice.
This was...
So let's take a moment to talk about the place that serves as headquarters for PirateTownRadio.com, and that would be the 8th Street Lofts building. And now, if you're already sitting here while we're